Well, yeah, I'm supposed to be talking to you about food as medicine, and I usually find out that most people want to hear this particular story of my own odyssey in preserving my life, as they say, which started 6 years ago in 1999. And usually when I address a group like this, I usually participate by asking for participation from the audience if it so pleases you. And so what I would like to do is take a poll or a survey, and I'll ask maybe 3 or 4 questions, and as those of you who raise your hands, do raise your hands, if you could keep them elevated until the questions are over, it might give us all some sense of where we're at as a community and as a species. So the first question is, how many folks in this room have either had or currently have cancer? Okay, keep the hands up, please. Thank you. And keep them up. And second question is, how many people in this room have had significant others with cancer, namely spouses, children, parents, brothers and sisters? Okay, so keep them up. And then third question is, how about extended family, which includes grandparents, grandchildren, nephews, nieces, uncles, aunts? All right, and then last but not least, close friends. Close friends. So you look around the room, and this is where we've come so far. I'll give you a little, I think, overview. I think what people need is an overview as to where this cancer industry has taken us. And for that matter, the modern medical machine has taken us. I don't have any quarrel or any malcontent or discontentedness with modern medicine for what it's remarkably able to do. You fall out of a tree or you're in a bad car wreck, it's pretty astounding what modern medicine can do in terms of piecing you back together. I've got nothing but compliments and praise for the kinds of things that modern medicine has achieved with regard to acute medicine and trauma. But when it comes to chronic or degenerative illnesses, it's been a major fiasco. And that's because chronic illness and degenerative illnesses have nothing to do with the deficiency of heroic medicine. It has to do with the fact that our environment is going down the tubes. It has to do with the fact that the construct of health is being lost. A lot of it already has been lost. And that until you start recognizing the cause behind the cause behind the cause, there isn't anything that heroic medicine can do to reconcile this major, major problem that we have in Western industrial cultures. When I was coming back a year ago from California, I was at the Western Organic Dairy Conference, the first annual Western Organic Dairy Conference. And my plane got stranded because of weather and other issues in Washington, D.C. before I flew back to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So I had some time to kill, and I was walking around, and I ended up picking up a magazine called Fortune Magazine. How many people have heard of Fortune Magazine? It's a very conventional financial advisory magazine. I don't subscribe to it. The only reason why I picked it up was because it had a front page feature article in there called Why We're Losing the War on Cancer. And I thought, well, this ought to be interesting. Why are we losing the war on cancer? And in the process of reading the article in depth, it never really addressed what my conclusions have been and currently are as to why we have cancer and why we're losing the war on cancer, which is environmental assaults and insults, nutritional deficiencies, nutritional antagonists, stress, lifestyle, those kinds of things. It only dealt with the modern medical model of oncology in our conventional oncology wards. So they interviewed people, prestigious oncologists, in Sloan Memorial Kettering in New York City, in MD Anderson in Texas, a few other places. And what was interesting about that article was they were talking about the history of the war on cancer, quote unquote, which was actually initiated by President Richard Nixon around 1972. So we're talking about a 30-year war, quote unquote, on cancer. Well, first of all, anytime the United States declares war on something domestic, it's a disaster. The war on drugs, the war on poverty, all these things have been major fiascos in the United States. So when you deal with the war on cancer, what is the war on cancer? Well, they decided to ear tag all this funding for research. And in that last 30 some odd years, we have amassed $200 billion worth of research for cancer. And what was amazing with the graphs that you saw in this article was that the 4 main cancer killers in the United States, which are lung cancer, prostate cancer, breast cancer, and colorectal cancer, once that cancer has metastasized, which it invariably does, metastasis means it spreads from the primary tumor to distant locations like the liver or the bone or the brain. In that whole 30 some years with $200 billion, and by the way, there was 1.56 million medical papers published on research on cancer in this time. Not 1.56 thousand, 1.56 million research papers. There hasn't been one iota, scintilla of progress on the 4 major killers of cancer in the United States. And yet, we unraveled the human genome in 18 years. We put a man on the moon after the space program was officiated in 9 years. We developed an atomic weapon in 17 months under the Manhattan Project during World War II, before we were even sure what atomic energy was. In 17 months. And yet $200 billion later, and 30 some years later, we've got zip on improvement on the 4 major cancer killers in the United States. This year in the United States, we will have 1.3 million people diagnosed with cancer, and we will have 600,000 of us die of cancer, about half. There's more people now that make their living in the cancer industry than that die from cancer in the United States. So it's turned into this massive industry, and the whole basis of this article was when they talked to the oncologists, who were quite apparently disgusted and frustrated. It was predicated on the fact that the model, as they call it, stinks. And that's a quote. The model stinks. And what's the model? The model is that the drug companies, the pharmaceutical companies that come out with these promising new drugs that you read about in the Wall Street Journal that start inching the stock of that particular company up because there's some promising new breakthrough in the cancer issue. They're all predicated on the fact that you can shrink a laboratory mouse's tumor by 10%, basically. And yet, as the article pointed out, tumors don't kill cancer patients. Metastatic illness kills cancer patients when it spreads from the breast and ends up going to the brain or the lungs or the liver or the bones. So that being said, it's like, well, what is that predicated on? Well, it's predicated on the fact that they now know that metastasis kills about 90% of cancer patients, and also 50% of cancer patients die of a condition known as cachexia, wasting disease. They have nothing for metastasis, and you know why? Because there's one thing that does check metastasis, and that's strong immunity. And drugs don't impart strong immunity. That's what keeps us from coming apart at the seams every single day. Everybody in this room right now is dealing with an immune system that is doing something remarkably and amazingly